So yesterday, our Shams Charania reported that three-time All-Star Bradley Beal has agreed to a contract buyout with the Phoenix Suns and plans to join the Clippers on a 2-year, $11 million deal. That second year is a player option. This is all after he clears waivers. So Beal was nothing if not concise with his goodbye message that he posted on social media. Just throwing up a little deuces, much to the amusement of several players around the league. Trae Young, Bam Adebayo, Andre Drummond, former Suns teammate Kevin Durant, all got a kick out of this. We did too. Shams reported that 5 of their teams, though, they were actually interested. The Heat, the Bucks, the Lakers, the Wolves, and the Warriors in Beal, but all signs pointed to him wanting to be a Clipper, and that looks like it's going to happen after he clears waivers. But Bobby, do you think that any of these teams have maybe another move out there to make after missing out on Beal?
I do, and I think we're going to certainly keep an eye on Golden State here. Malika, we're 3 weeks into free agency right now, and guess how many players Golden State has on their roster? 9. There is certainly a lot more work to do here, and a lot of it's being held up with the restricted free agency of Jonathan Kuminga, who is still one of the 4 restricted free agents out. Golden State continues to sit in a holding pattern right now. There's certainly a priority to get some front court depth. Right now they have Quentin Post as their lone center and some backcourt scoring here. So Golden State, 3 weeks into free agency, still have to go out and sign about 5 to 6 players here.
Real quick, Aman, we haven't gotten your thoughts yet on this whole saga with Jonathan Kuminga.
That's tough. I really like his game. I really like everything that he brings. If I was him, I would be sitting there with my hands up like, guys, what are we doing?
Right.
I know I can hoop, and I know that I'm only going to get older every year. So it's like, what are we doing? What's my plan?
And what else can he do to prove to the Golden State Warriors that he's worthy of being called on?
I think he gets talked about around the league enough, especially when you start listening to his peers. When his peers, especially when they talk about it and say who do they think is on their way to that, they talk about him.
Right.
If he is a frustrating assignment to have on a night-to-night basis, and when he finally gets his chance and get his opportunity, I think it's going to be foot to neck.
That's a pretty high compliment. But since we're talking about the players that are still available and waiving and stretching, Damian Lillard, he is still an unrestricted free agent after being bought out by the Milwaukee Bucks. And I know that everyone is looking towards, well, it'll be another year. But what team do you think is the best fit for Dame here, Bobby? Because it could be a year, but it could not be.
Well, I mean, I look at the Damian Lillard situation. I think there's the human element, and then there's also the basketball court here. And for me, it's a reunion back in Portland here. I think certainly where Damian Lillard is at his career, where his children reside in Portland, he's doing all his rehab in Portland. Yes, he will likely be out an extended period of time this year, but if you compare him with Jrue Holiday in that Portland backcourt next year, I just look at a reunion with Portland. He certainly left on better terms than a player that would have who asked to be traded. For me, I would circle Portland for Damian Lillard. If I was asked to pick a place, that would be the place for him.
Wow. Portland, again. There's a certain storybook ending that would be, though, Tim.
And look, there's family issues as well there. I would rather see Dame be put in a situation where he can chase a ring, where he can be the last piece of a potential championship puzzle. You know, maybe back in his hometown in the Bay Area with Golden State, if they can get some business done and put together the kind of team. Oh, your hometown. But, hey, if he wants to go back to Portland, that would be
That's certainly interesting, though, Bobby, and something that we'll keep an eye on being back on the floor. Joel Embiid, his year was really filled with ups and downs here. Let's go all the way back. After being drafted in 2014 and missing his first 2 seasons with various injuries, Joel Embiid would string together 8 seasons where he averaged just under 28 points and 11 rebounds, while also being named the 2023 NBA MVP. Now, in September of 2024, after signing a 3-year max extension, Embiid had this to say about Philadelphia. He said, quote, "I want to be here for the rest of my career. I love this community and everything you've given me and my family. There's a lot more work to do. You guys deserve a championship, and I think we're just getting started here." Now, those championship aspirations, they got off to a little bit of a rocky start in 2024. Embiid, he would miss the first 9 games of the season due to injury and a suspension. When Embiid was on the floor to start the season, he did look good, though. 31-point game against the Bulls after missing the previous 7 games, a 27 and 9 rebound performance against the defending champion Boston Celtics. That one was on Christmas Day. However, the Sixers and Joel, they would start to struggle in February after a 7-game losing streak, and then the Sixers made that decision to shut him down for the remainder of the season with a lingering knee trouble here. So for the first time here on NBA Today, I'd like to welcome in Dotun Akintoye, who just released an excellent profile that's up right now on ESPN.com. I really encourage all of our readers to take a second to go and read it when you have an hour this afternoon. But you sat down with Joel Embiid several times throughout this story. What stood out to you the most in those conversations?
Well, thanks for having me first, Malika. I think Joel is an incredibly sensitive, incredibly complicated person. And I think there are some of those traits that are perhaps at odds with the role that he plays, which is a leader of an organization, a superstar. And I think he's been struggling with that ever since he's been cast in that role.
Yeah, I think sensitive was a really good way to put this. And the way that you explore what Joel Embiid has been through in this story was really interesting to me. Something that jumped out in your profile was just the amount of frustration, I think, that Joel has fostered throughout his career, especially with the organization. How did he express that to you? Because there was a couple of specific moments that I think fans may be surprised by the behind the scenes of.
Yeah, I think, we talked about continuity quite a bit, and it means something to him. I mean, in basketball terms, I think he has a sort of theory about roster consistency, what that does. He often talks about the Denver Nuggets and their championship, but I also think it means something to him in a deeper way than that. Trust for him is like a huge, not a concern, perhaps a fixation is maybe the better way to. And, one of the incidents of the last season was the leak in the fall after a closed door meeting that the team had. And he brought it up with me, and it's still bothering him very clearly. I think for him, it's a microcosm of certain fears he has and a certain history he has with the organization about people who maybe don't have his best interest at heart and who he can't rely on. So it's on his mind. It's a huge facet of his personality.
And one of the ways that I read it is he looked to sort of take back some of that control when he felt like that trust was spiraling. He talks about the behind the scenes of an interview he did this season with Lisa Salters. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, I think Joel was incredibly frustrated this last season, and he felt like no one was listening to him. And it felt, again, I think, of an echo of an earlier part of his career where he didn't feel listened to and he shut down. And I think not a similar thing happened this year in that, there was a lot of pressure on him to play and his body didn't feel right. And I think finally, and I think the conversation with Lisa happened in February, he had enough. And he was going to speak his mind publicly and sort of state his position and then let the team deal with the fallout of that.
And that's when he said to Lisa, I may have to have surgery. The team was caught off guard by that, but that seemed to be, as he put it, his cry for help is the way that he described it to you, to sort of say, no, I need to be listened to here. And now he's describing this as the most important offseason of his career. And I think there may be some fans, just being honest out there, who may say, well, what about the last ones? We've heard this story before, right? Why does this feel different, and how does he plan on sort of wrapping his arms around this?
Well, he's approaching it, I'd say, carefully and aggressively at the same time.
Okay.
I saw him shortly after his surgery, and he was already in rehab. But I think also he's being careful in that he's not going to allow external pressures to force him back to the court before he feels he's ready to come back. And I think there's a big uncertainty. He doesn't know what body he's going to be returning to and what kind of player he's going to be. And it's difficult to ascend to the place that he's been as a player and then be anything else. So I think that's the thing that's on his mind, and that's why it's so important, because the next time we see Joel Embiid on the basketball court, we will be watching, hopefully, I think he believes, the last few years of his prime.
Doesn't know what sort of body he's going to be returning to. I imagine for an NBA superstar, that's an incredibly scary feeling in a lot of ways, still trying to feel like yourself, as you said, in the end of your prime. Through all of these ups and downs, Joel Embiid has been really introspective, and it's rare that he gives someone such an intimate glance, and he did that with you here. What has he learned about himself through this process that now he's ready to share with the world?
I think the last year of his life has been really momentous for him. You know, there's so many things to talk about. I think in a way he's learning that he needs people more, but I think he's also learning to please them less. And that's an interesting place to be. He talked to me about being in therapy and trying to, you know, sort of unpacking the feelings he's been dealing with, I think, over the last year, but also over the length of his career. There's, you know, one of his former coaches said something to me. They said, you know, Joel would have been fine on a deserted island. I think there's something fundamentally lonely in him. And I think he's learning about that too. But that's at odds with the role he has to play, as you said earlier. He has to be a leader. And I think he's learning about that side of himself and trying to explore that. You know, the friendship that he has with Tyrese Maxey is really important. It's a real connection for him. And I think it's made him a better teammate.
Jayden, I really appreciate you taking the time to sort of walk us through the way that Joel Embiid has been thinking and feeling about this entire process. Pun intended, but I really encourage everybody to go and to read your story, because I think, as everyone at home knows right now, there is so much nuance that we can only capture so much of right here on NBA Today. Jayden, I really appreciate the time. Again, his story is up right now on ESPN.com. And when he is right, there is nobody like Joel Embiid in terms of scoring, right? His 30.9 points per game the last 5 seasons, it leads the entire NBA here. As we say hello to our front office insider, Bobby Marks, I want to dive into a lot of parts of this story, Bobby, but let's start here with you, because there's so much to unpack. Do you agree, Bobby, that this is the most important offseason of Joel Embiid's life here?
I do, Malika, and I look at this as this partnership between Philadelphia and Joel Embiid. There's no turning back, right? Like, they've got to make this work, certainly from the Embiid health perspective here. And I remember last September when Joel Embiid had 2 years left on his contract, and he wound up signing that 3-year max extension, and that drew a lot of ire across the league. Why would Philadelphia commit another 3 years to a player that certainly is an MVP candidate, but it certainly has been injury related? And here you look at it. There's 4 years, $242 million. Malika, the last year of that contract is $69 million. That is the danger zone of contracts. So for both sides, they've got to make it work here, for better or worse.
Tim, do you feel like there's a real conflict when it comes to the messaging around the 76ers here between what Joel Embiid is saying and what the 76ers say?
Who cares what I think? Joel Embiid clearly feels like there's a conflict, and there have been a lot of issues with the Philadelphia 76ers throughout the course of his career. The constant seems to have been a lack of trust in the organization. And when trust is lost, it's really hard to regain, really hard to rebuild. And, you know, just listen to Joel Embiid. You know, read his words. He clearly does not feel